2023 has been as challenging a year for tech as any you can imagine. Across the world, the ramp-up in global interest rates dramatically reduced the capital available to invest in tech companies. And that hit both publicly held and privately held tech companies really hard. It made for a roller coaster of a year. As that year, 2023, comes to a close, we bring you this first and special episode of Tech into the Future to review everything that's happened, the big themes, and to talk about what's coming in 2024. Welcome to Tech into the Future. Hello and welcome to Tech into the Future, a brand new show where we talk about everything that's happening in tech across the world and locally and how it affects you. My name is Tomiwa Ladikomo. I'm the CEO of Big Cabal Media. We're the publisher of Tech Cabal, a digital publication that's been covering the business of tech in Africa for the last decade.
And I am Ngozi Maduka-Dozier. I look after Android partnerships for West Africa at Google. I spent most of my career working for the biggest companies across technology, media, and telecommunications. I, alongside Tomiwa, will be your guide into the world of tech in Nigeria, Africa, and the globe. We're here to make sense of a year where change was a constant theme, and its impact in the tech industry has been massive. Now, let's take a look at some of the highlights and low points of 2023.
Whether you're a super geek or a technophobe, you couldn't escape tech in 2023. Here are some of the trends that captured our attention in 2023 and are changing the way we live and work, for better or worse. Artificial intelligence was the technological breakthrough that defined 2023, even if the product we all started using this year was released back in 2019. OpenAI's ChatGPT chatbot broke through into the stratosphere, signing up more than 100 million users worldwide and seeing nearly 1.5 billion visitors per month. All the big tech companies are working on their own versions. That's not surprising, as generative AI could transform almost every industry from homework assignments to medical diagnosis. Then there are those who think it will cause the end of civilization.
I've been working on what we would now call the problem of aligning artificial general intelligence. How to shape the preferences and behavior of a powerful artificial mind such that it does not kill everyone.
Issues related to biased algorithms, lack of transparency, and the potential for AI to be weaponized raised critical questions about the responsible development and deployment of this powerful technology. Artificial intelligence has many people fearing for their jobs, but ironically, it was the tech sector itself that saw mass layoffs in 2023. From big job losses at Google, Amazon, and Microsoft to e-commerce platform Copia, more than 250,000 tech jobs were axed globally. One of the standout trends in 2023 has been the increasing focus on sustainable technology. From eco-friendly gadgets to energy-efficient innovations, tech companies worldwide are prioritizing environmental responsibility. Solar-powered devices, recyclable materials, and energy-efficient designs are becoming the norm. Meanwhile, the year saw new advancements in solar panels and electric vehicles, reflecting a collective effort to combat climate change. The relationship between social media and mental health remained a contentious issue in 2023. With the increasing influence of social platforms, concerns over addiction, cyberbullying, and the impact of constant connectivity on mental well-being reached new heights. Tech companies faced scrutiny for their role in addressing these issues and promoting a healthier online environment.
We face a number of important issues around privacy, safety, and democracy, and you will rightfully have some hard questions for me to answer.
Technology is a force for good, but in 2023, some of its negative impacts took center stage. And as the year draws to a close, only one thing is certain: there will be many more changes to come in 2024.
So tell me, Tomiwa, what is your word for 2023?
Challenging. It was a challenging year.
Fair enough.
And we're going to talk all about that. But first, what's your word for 2024?
Well, first, let me tell you my word for 2023,
Okay.
which was resilience, or is resilience for still in 2023. So resilience. And then my word for 2024 is tenacity, because as tough as 2023 has been, I get a sneaky feeling that 2024 is going to be tougher. And I think 2023 has prepped us, or is prepping us, for 2024. So yes, those are my words.
Fantastic. So challenging, resilience, and tenacity. Let's talk a little bit about some of the big themes of 2023. I think that this year kicked off with a really tight funding environment. It started late last year as the rise in interest rates in the US and kind of most of the developed markets reduced the available funding for startups, for the tech industry across the globe. And we saw this kind of play out in the public markets with big global giants, whether it's Microsoft or Meta or X, etc. Elon Musk took X off of the markets and made it private, but we saw it affect those companies. And then we saw it start to play out with startups and sort of privately listed companies. And all of that led to the very first big trend of this year.
Layoffs. So yes, this year started off with layoffs, and more layoffs. And the truth is that everyone from Amazon to Zoom and everyone else in between was doing a massive cut in their human capital, because I think there was a growth explosion that happened during the COVID years, and there was an inability to meet some of those projections. And so, yes, everyone was cutting people left, right, and center.
Those layoffs start to affect African companies as well. So we saw it at Alezo, Chippercash, Copiac, Kipa, even sort of globally funded startups like Paystack reduced their people. And sometimes this was very strategic. With Paystack, they decided we don't want to have people in these markets because it's too expensive to maintain them, given the realities of the markets today. But other people sort of were like, this segment is no longer profitable, we're going to exit it. Other people were reducing their burn, trying to fight their way to profitability. And so it was an interesting year where we saw people use layoffs and sort of cost reduction really as a critical strategy to extend their runway and to find their way towards profitability. And I will say, as a company that unfortunately, as a leader of a company that unfortunately also had to do layoffs, it's really painful.
Yeah,
it's really, really tough.
I mean,
whether it's cutting a strategic initiative that you've really invested in, or most importantly, like the people that you've hired, and like finding great talent is like it's really hard in Africa. So you found these people, you've convinced them to come. We're going to conquer the world together, and then you got to say, "I'm sorry, we messed up. You got to go."
Right.
It's really, really tough, and I think that a lot tech companies take a lot of beating for their layoffs, and it's like, why did you plan better? I don't think any leader really wants to do layoffs, but the market demands, and companies react.
So in addition to layoffs, there were some companies that couldn't just lay off. They had to shut down completely. And not even just in the tech space, going beyond that to the pharmaceuticals and the fast-moving consumer goods with GSK and Unilever and the rest. And the reason that I bring that up, even though it's a tech show, is to say that I feel like some of these closures are also signaling to the market that Nigeria is, what's the word I want to use? Not unstable, but probably a difficult market to do business. A challenging market to do business in. Exactly.
Yes. No, it's a really challenging market, and I think that in the tech space with venture-backed companies, they basically assumed you've done your Series A, you're going to have access to capital for your Series B, and so you're going to have the length of time that you need to get profitable. And unfortunately, once the funding environment changed, those rules kind of went out the door. And so we saw companies closing, from Alezo to sort of
54Gene.
54Gene. And it was a tough year for those closures. There's a famous Warren Buffett saying about when the tide goes out, we see who's swimming naked.
Naked, yes.
This year we saw a lot of companies swimming naked. So we saw the people who couldn't hack it from sort of... in terms of staying in business, but we also saw the companies where there was fraud, there was sort of mismanagement of customer funds, and so we saw that in Dash, we saw with Float, we saw very, very spectacularly with Tingo, which the
Tingo.
SEC is now taking to court for essentially and saying this business doesn't exist. And I mean, they raised eyebrows for a long time before this sort of
They
judgment
sure did.
came, but now they're in court, and let's see what happens there. Yeah.
But here's the thing, it wasn't all doom and gloom in 2023. The tech space also brought about to our collective consciousness what people are saying is the biggest event in human history, the famous AI.
Absolutely.
And AI went from, like, it catapulted from being a tech term to a buzzword, and now an integral part of our lives, shaping the future of technology and revolutionizing the industries.
You know, I had a conversation on stage with a couple of guys earlier this year, and they said by 2050, none of us are going to have jobs because AI is going to change the way everything works. And so it's going to be a really interesting sort of like next few years for us, as particularly generative AI, whether it's your ChatGPT or your DALL-E or your Midjourney.
Or your Bard.
Or your Bard. As they change the way we work, as they change the way we play, the way they change industries, whether it's pharmaceuticals to science, it's going to be a really, really interesting period. I think another really interesting thing that happened this year is African governments getting really serious about tech. And we've seen that across the continent. Over the last few years, you know, there's been the big four markets, you know, Nigeria, Egypt, South Africa, Kenya. But this year we started to see, and on the Tech About side, I saw this, where we got invites from Algeria, from DRC, from Uganda, with countries that are really serious about sort of making big moves in technology. And I think even here in Nigeria, we saw the Nigerian government get a lot more active in tech in an interesting way. What are your thoughts?
No, indeed, especially with the new minister, I think they have done a great job in their staffing. They've changed the face of technology. They've changed the face of policy and the people that are making some of these decisions. They've brought in a younger group of people. They've brought in people from the private sector. And so I think there is a seriousness about technology and the understanding that technology is what is going to catapult us from being a developing world to hopefully developed. And so these are some of the things that happened in 2023, and yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really exciting, and looking forward to seeing what all of that sort of changes for us as a country. Yeah.
Indeed.
All right, so you've heard what Ngozi and I think, but we're lucky to have with us here Emeka Ajene. He's the founder and the publisher of AfriDigest, and he's an analyst with a keen understanding of what's happening in tech. Welcome, Emeka. Good to have you with us.
Thank you for having me, Tomiro. Excited to talk with you guys.
Excellent.
Thank you for being here. All right, so like Tomiwa said, you've heard us banter, but what do we know? You are the analyst extraordinaire. So tell us, what are your big themes for 2023?
No, I think you guys covered a lot of the big themes, to be very honest. But what I will say is, you know, despite kind of the negativity, despite the challenges that this year has posed, there have been some silver linings, right? So the first one I would say is, you know, despite all the layoffs and the downturn, a new unicorn was minted this year in the African tech ecosystem, right? There's not that many. There's only, there were 6 before, and as of February, there are now 7, right? So in Egypt, a company called M&T Halan, that's in the credit digital lending space, became Africa's 7th unicorn. So, you know, despite all the doom and gloom, you still have some bright lights. Yeah. In addition to that, I would say another big story that I'm watching that'll probably have play out quite a bit next year is kind of the influence of big tech, big companies in the African space, right? So, you know, we know that Amazon is going to launch finally in South Africa next year and compete in Africa's e-commerce space, right? So that's something to watch for. This year, we heard from Visa that Visa pledged to invest $1 billion in Africa through 2027, and this year they launched their fintech accelerator, right? So about 20 fintechs were selected for that, and maybe about a third of those will receive investment from Visa, right? So these are some of the, big tech moves. And I forgot, but I should certainly mention in Kenya, there was a whole idea of WorldCoin coming to Kenya, right? Which is quite controversial in terms of scanning Kenyans' eyeballs in return for cash, right? So this identity project. So just these kind of moves. WorldCoin was suspended this year, but it's coming back next year.
It is.
So it's just it is. Right?
I think it's really interesting seeing sort of the big players moving Africa. They're obviously a big part of the ecosystem, and they are big spenders. They're big sort of technology drivers, but you also have to really pay attention to what they're doing and make sure that it's not hurting Africans. I mean, so actually I think still in Kenya, I think it was called Sama, the company that was doing sort of AI scanning for AI training, I think for Meta, and they got shut down. I think it's been interesting to see sort of that regulatory action where there's a bit of concern. Are the things that these big companies doing in Africa, are they good for us? And I think that's definitely a theme that we'll probably be covering as the weeks go on, and we'll be looking at in 2024.
Absolutely.
What do you think about mergers and acquisition? That was a big thing this year.
Yeah, it's a big theme overall across the continent, and certainly a big theme here in Nigeria. I think that's going to be another thing to watch for next year, but it's already happening this year in 2023. So some of the things I'm watching for is kind of the different flavors of mergers and acquisitions, right? So here in Nigeria, and I'll explain what that means, right? So here in Nigeria, you had a company, Fair Money, that's a neobank, acquiring Payforce, which is kind of a basically an agent network company, right? So the first flavor there is acquiring a company to gain a new capability, right? So you had a digital credit-led player that's basically giving out digital loans, and they acquire somebody that enables them to have a presence physically on the field, right? So that kind of new capability is something that's interesting, and the first flavor. The second flavor we really see is about basically entering a new region, right? So you had Smile Identity, which is a Pan-African player, but really has the biggest market here in Nigeria. You have them acquiring a Nigerian company, Ghanaian company called Approve, right? So Approve actually has a strong presence in Francophone Africa, and they give Smile Identity that exposure to the Francophone African market, which Smile believes is going to be a growth area, right? So that's kind of the second flavor, acquiring a company to gain new markets geographically. And I think the third type of acquisition we've seen is really kind of to gain, basically acquiring somebody in the similar space, but gaining new kind of tech talent, right? So an example here is a company called Bitmama, that's a crypto exchange, that's a turned payment platform, acquiring maybe a distressed company called Payday, right? The neobank, right? So, according to me, if you let me tell it, this acquisition, Bitmama didn't need to acquire Payday, but they look at it as, okay, we could acquire your team and acquire your talent, and that has helped us build our roadmap a bit faster, so right?
Opportunistic.
Absolutely, very opportunistic.
I think the mergers and acquisitions are really interesting, and I suspect that we will see them accelerate in 2024 as more companies run out of cash and try to figure out what their options are. Yeah. And then I think maybe a bit more optimistically, as companies decide, actually, we should collaborate, we should come together to compete better, to find new opportunities. And we're going to be looking at sort of some of these. We'll see how like Wasoko and Max AB's sort of merger plays out in 2024. Yeah. Before we ask you to leave, there's one more story that would be useful to get your perspective on, which is sort of like the funders, the investing market. Yeah. Is there any optimism? Like, how are we looking?
Yeah.
What's happened this year that's worth
Exactly.
talking about?
No, I'm glad you brought that up, right? So this year was actually a big year for investor optimism, right? So despite the downturn and kind of the negativity, we saw investors say, I believe in Africa, I believe in the future, I believe in this market. And so to say some concrete examples, you have Partech, which is a VC firm in Senegal. They raised $300 million to invest in African startups, right? So this is the biggest fundraise by a single fund ever, and that happened this year. You also have a company called, what's the name of the company? Norskin, right? So Norskin 22, a VC fund, really based in Kigali, but has money from off the continent as well.
Partner here in Nigeria as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Pan-African and also global, right? But they also raised $205 million, right, for their first fund. This is the first fund they've ever raised, and so again, this is a record. The biggest first fund ever raised in Africa is at $205 million by Norskin, right? So, and then you have Founders Factory Africa in Johannesburg, right? So they raised about $100 million. So between just three companies, three VC firms, this is over $500 million, like $600 million to go into African tech startups in the future. So despite all the negativity you read, the future is quite bright over the next year and beyond.
I will say, and that's fascinating and exciting. I'm always skeptical about raising FX, right? Because then you have to pay back in a currency that continues to depreciate, and like every currency on the continent continues to depreciate. So I think one of my hopes, in as much as I'm excited to get FX onto the continent, is seeing local investors So at least that way, the pressure on the companies that are getting funded is less, right? But yes, so fantastic, amazing. Before we let you go, one last question.
Sure.
I know we don't want to project, we don't want to ask people to project because nobody has a crystal ball, but if there was something you wanted to see in 2024 in this industry, what would it be?
Yeah, so I think first thing I'm looking for, not just I want to see, but I expect to see is just more creativity, right? So more creativity overall and across basically 3 specific areas. So the first area goes to what you were just talking about, right? So FX. So I think a lot of companies are looking at the environment every week, basically. They see the Naira falling. So I think what you have to do is be creative around how do I earn hard currency? How do I expose myself to earning, whether it's dollars, euros or pounds, what can I do, right? So creativity there. The second thing I would say is creativity really around the business model, right? So one concrete example is this company, Chipper Cash, one of Africa's unicorns. So historically, they've been a cross-border payments player, but I think this year, they actually opened up a new business line and got into basically identity verification, right? So now companies can go to Chipper Cash and help verify new users, right? So they basically had a lot of this data and said, how can we unlock this and create new value? And I think you'll see a lot of companies saying, okay, what we do X today, how can we do X plus Y tomorrow? So creativity around the business model as well. And I think you'll also need to see kind of creativity around kind of how we lead, right? So I think you've seen companies kind of, again, you have these cuts that I don't think we're, in some cases that we're not quite deep enough, right? So some companies you mentioned, like Copia Global in Kenya, like Chipper Cash, like I just mentioned, Alurzo in Nigeria, they've done multiple rounds of layoffs, right? So it's just that there's a need, and that shows you effectively they didn't act boldly. They didn't cut hard enough initially. So that just kind of, it's kind of death by 1,000 paper cuts, where if you're in that company, absolutely, you don't know what's coming tomorrow is another, so just, so that's kind of what I'm looking for next year, creativity around different areas from, from teams and leaders.
Fantastic conversation with Emeka. As we're coming to the end of this show, we're going to talk about some of the top people in tech this year. And we have it from 3 angles: global, Africa, and Nigeria. So for me, my sort of global person of tech this year is Sam Altman of OpenAI.
Agreed.
I mean, it's been the most influential sort of tech shift in the world this year. It's really blown people's mind. Sam has led that charge, and then later in the year, we had this whole drama with him getting ousted and then coming back.
Yes.
So really, he's been the man of the year. The second one is Africa.
Yes.
And I think in Africa, my choice is Karim Bagur.
And I tell you, I don't know who that is.
Yeah, he's a really interesting one. So Emeka talked about optimism and MNTML being sort of like this new unicorn that's got minted. But actually, Karim has done one of the very, very important things, which is a massive tech exit in Africa. So his company, InstaDeep, exited for $685 million earlier this year. It's a really, really important thing because for investors, they want to know, can we build companies in Africa that actually sell? Paystack was a great exit. We've seen Main One do an exit, but InstaDeep's a really, really large exit, really, really great signal. They're a data intelligence company doing really interesting work. And so Karim and his entire team, I think, have done a marvelous thing for the ecosystem. Looking forward to seeing a lot more of this.
That's a massive story. And like you said, I think it's important that investors don't just look at Africa as where the numbers are going to come from in terms of users, right? It's also where revenue comes from as well. And that if you invest, there is opportunity to 2x, 3x, or however many X to exit.
All the X's.
Yeah, all the X's. Bringing it back home, I think my person of the year for technology in Nigeria goes to the Honorable Minister, Bosun Tijani, the Minister of Communications, Innovation, and Digital. I must say, by and large, I am very impressed by the way he has hit the ground running. He is a fellow private tech person like the rest of us. So he understands the importance of partnering with government and partnering with the private sector. He's done a lot of engagements so far. He has a clear roadmap. He is the one person that has come out and said, here are the things that I want to accomplish. I want to accomplish it by this time. Here is how you're going to score me by the end of year 1, year 2, year 3. He is pushing transparency and accountability. And I think that is what you look for in leadership. So that would have to be my person of the year, my tech person of the year.
I agree. I think he's hit the ground really, really strong. It's a great start. We are going to be keeping him honest. Over the next year, we are going to see, and it's great that he's given us a roadmap so we can say, this is what you promised us.
Exactly.
This is what you're delivering. But I really am excited. I think along with you, I'm excited about the start that he's had, about sort of like the team of young people sort of leading NITDA, NCC, like NIGECOMSAT, etc. So excited to see what all of those people do. But yeah, Bosun as Nigeria Tech Person of the Year, fantastic.
Thank you for joining us for the first episode of Tech into the Future. Join us next week and every week after as we take you into the business and impact of technology in Africa, how it's changing the world and how it's changing your world. Thank you and see you next week.